My name is Helena Carter, and at 70 I thought I had seen everything that life could take from a woman. I saw my body age, my friends leave, and finally I saw my husband descend into a coffin that seemed too small for the history we lived. Since the funeral, the house had become too big, too quiet, full of echoes that no one else heard but Mim. You spent my days tidying up things that were already tidy, just to fool the feeling that I had been left behind. That morning, I just wanted to clean out Richard's old office so that it might hurt a little less to look at that closed door. The office smelled of old paper, cold coffee, and memories that had not yet found a place to land. The folders lined up on the shelf seemed to watch me, as if they held secrets I had never been allowed to know. I passed a cloth over the dark wooden table, trying not to linger on the circular mark of the glass that he always forgot to use with rest. Every detail inside screamed his name, while mine sounded like a whisper lost in that house. It was when I opened the last drawer, the one I always avoided, that something different happened. At the bottom of the drawer, under old beads and dry pens, I found Richard's cell phone. It was a simple old device, with the leather cover already faded at the edges. For a moment I almost left him right there, afraid of what that object could still carry. But longing spoke louder than fear, as it almost always happens to me. I picked up the phone carefully, as if it were made of glass, and I felt a shiver run through my arms. I took the device to the living room and sat in the armchair where I used to wait for him to arrive from work. I pressed the side button, and to my surprise, the screen lit up with difficulty, as if waking up from a coma that was too long. The system seemed stuck, confusing, with icons that I didn't quite understand. I heard a strange crack coming from the speaker, like a swallowed hiss. It was enough for me to feel that that cell phone still had something to say. I've never been good with technology, and Melissa keeps repeating it as if it were a medical diagnosis. I thought about calling her, but something in me recoiled, as if an old instinct told me not to involve my daughter at that moment. Instead, I grabbed my bag, stuffed my phone inside, and decided to leave the house. The cold air outside greeted me like a punch in the chest, reminding me that the world was moving on, even without Richard. The store was cramped, full of wires, parts, and disassembled appliances on top of a scratched counter. Behind the counter, a thin young man with a thin beard was working on a computer with the concentration of a surgeon. The doorbell rang as I entered, announcing my presence more outrageously than I would have liked. He looked up, smiled slightly, and asked if he could help. I just put Richard's phone on the counter, my heart racing as if I was giving away a secret. I explained that the device belonged to my deceased husband and that I just wanted to see if there was anything inside that I could keep. He turned on the device, connected some cables, and started typing things I didn't understand. His face, previously neutral, gained a curious expression when he saw the record screen. He said there were recently deleted files, and that some appeared to be voice recordings. When I heard the word erased, I felt my stomach twist. I asked who could have deleted it, since I had never touched that cell phone since Richard died. The young man commented with cruel naturalness that someone had accessed the device weeks after his death. He mentioned dates, and I could only think of who had the password to that phone. The answer came on its own, like an uncomfortable whisper: Melissa. It was there that an almost imperceptible fissure arose between the mother I was and the woman I was about to become. The boy said he could try to recover the deleted files, but that he had no way to guarantee how much he would return in one piece. I asked him how long it would take, and he replied that it would be at least a few hours of trying. I left the phone with him, feeling strangely guilty for insisting on touching something that might have been destined to be forgotten. Deep down, I knew that if there was one last message from Richard, I needed to hear it, even if it broke me a little more. I left the store with the feeling that somehow I had just opened a door that I didn't know how to close. As I walked back, my mind raced to Melissa, and to all the times she treated me like someone incapable. She said she would take care of everything, the bills, the papers, what came in the mail, as if I were a distracted child. I accepted it, because I thought that this was love, that it was protection, that it was her way of caring. Now, however, the pieces began to move inside me, forming an uncomfortable image. For the first time, I wondered if I hadn't put my whole life in the wrong hands. When I got home, the silence seemed heavier than usual. I sat at the kitchen table, looking at the clock as if I could speed up time. I prepared coffee without tasting, just to occupy my hands and keep my head from exploding in assumptions. With each passing minute, the idea that someone had tampered with Richard's last memory corroded me inside. When the landline rang, my heart jumped and almost hurt. It was the boy from the store, with the excited voice of someone who had good news to give. He said that he had managed to recover an important audio file, and that, due to its size, it seemed to be a long message. He explained that he was still finishing the process, but that I could already go there if I wanted to listen. For a few seconds, I couldn't answer. I just took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. I knew, with a certainty that hurt, that nothing would be the same after that audio. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep bringing exciting stories like this. On the way back to the store, my legs felt more fragile than ever, but there was something new about me, a kind of stubbornness. I kept repeating quietly that I had the right to listen to anything Richard had left for me. The street seemed narrower, as if the world was shrinking around me. Even so, I kept walking, one step after another, as if climbing a dark staircase without knowing where it ends. When I walked into the store, I felt like my heart was making more noise than the doorbell. The young man received me with a serious look, different from the slight curiosity he had before. He said the audio was ready to be heard, but he asked me if I was really sure I wanted to hear it. I swallowed hard and said yes, because saying no would mean continuing to live with too many questions. He placed a large headset over my ears, as if isolating me from the world. Then he pressed play, and Richard's voice, trembling and hoarse, invaded everything I was. He started by saying my name, Helena, in that affectionate way that I missed so much. He said he didn't know if he would have time to talk to me in person, so he was recording. He said that he had been hiding some things from me, but that now he was afraid of dying, taking secrets that could put me in danger. He talked about money, bills, documents that were not where I thought. And then, as if pouring gasoline on a lit match, he said, "Please don't trust Melissa." At that moment, my hands grew cold, and I felt the air disappear from my lungs. I couldn't understand how those words could come out of the mouth of the man who always defended our daughter. Richard explained that Melissa had done wrong things with the family's money, who had signed papers on my behalf. He said that he tried to protect her, but that he had gone too far, and now I was the one who took the risk. The audio cut off for a second, and I took the opportunity to wipe away the tears that flowed uncontrollably. When I took the earphones out, I was silent for a few seconds, staring at nothing, as if the floor had disappeared. The boy asked if I was okay, but there was no simple answer to that. I thanked him in a choked voice, paid for the service with trembling hands, and put Richard's phone in my purse, as if it were proof of a crime. I needed to go home. I needed to understand what it all meant for the life I thought I had. Deep down, however, I already knew that I would not return to the same house. When I arrived, Melissa's car was already parked in front, glowing like a warning. She was sitting in the living room, cross-legged, fiddling with her own cell phone, as if she owned time. He raised his head and asked, with a rehearsed smile, where I had gone. I replied only that I had solved some things, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I didn't want to start that conversation with fear, even though I was terrified. She noticed my strangeness and, as she always did, tried to take control of the situation. He asked if I had gone to the bank, if I had touched any documents, if anyone had talked to me about the will. I said no, but I mentioned carefully that I had found Richard's cell phone. For a second, I saw something pass over her face, like a barely disguised fright. That was enough to confirm what my heart already suspected. He said that I took the cell phone to a technician, that he managed to recover some deleted files. Melissa widened her eyes, and her smile disappeared as if it had been forcibly torn away. She stood up suddenly, asking why I had done this without telling her first. He spoke loudly, as if he were scolding a child, not a mother who had just become a widow. I just held the bag tighter, feeling the heavy device inside. When I told her that I had heard an audio of Richard, she came towards me and tried to take the bag. He said that it would only hurt me, that I was fragile, that I shouldn't be poking around in things from the past. I retreated, instinctively, as if protecting a piece of my own body. I asked her to calm down, but her voice only increased, full of irritation and impatience. It was the first time I felt physically afraid of my own daughter. As she spoke, my mind began to stitch together old memories. I remembered when she made me sign some papers, just to make things easier at the bank. From when she insisted that I leave everything in her name, saying it was safer. When he convinced me that I wouldn't understand that kind of subject, then it was better to trust. Suddenly, all of these scenes felt less careful and more controlling. Melissa took a deep breath, as if she was about to make a decision, and then said I was confused. She said that age was affecting me, that I was forgetful, repetitive, vulnerable. She said that if I continued like this, someone could take advantage of me, and she would have to intervene legally. The word intervene echoed in my head as a threat, not a protection. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just sad, I was in danger. I decided, without saying it out loud, that I would not show her the audio at that moment. He only said that he needed time to process everything, and that he didn't want to talk about it now. She rolled her eyes, raised her hands, as if she were dealing with a tiresome problem. She took her bag, said she would come back when I was more lucid, and left, slamming the door. The silence that remained afterwards was different from all the silences I had ever known. I was alone in the living room, with my heart racing and my purse tight to my chest. I grabbed Richard's phone, and for a moment thought about listening to the audio again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. But instead, I went to the bedroom and hid the device inside a drawer that only I used. I didn't know what to do yet. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have the courage left. But for the first time in many years, something inside me refused to obey. When I woke up that morning, I felt as if the night had passed, dragging chains down the hallway. I stood up slowly, with the feeling that there was something heavy resting on my chest. Richard's cell phone was hidden in the drawer next to the bed, but it seemed to whisper my name. I knew I needed to listen to the rest of the audio calmly, no matter how much it hurt. I took a deep breath, made coffee without really smelling it, and returned to the room with the cup in my trembling hands. I sat on the edge of the bed, closed my eyes for a moment and pressed play. Richard's voice returned, carrying a weight I had never heard before. He said he was afraid, that Melissa had been pressing for money that wasn't hers. He said that signatures had been forged and that he covered it all up thinking he would protect the family. But now, sick and feeling the end imminent, I had realized that his silence put my life at risk. As the message advanced, I heard sounds that sounded like an office environment. Richard spoke in a hurry, as if he were recording in secret, looking over his shoulder. He said he had left documents in a safe in the basement in case something happens. He said that Melissa had been getting aggressive whenever he brought up the subject of legalizing the accounts in my name. And then, with a choked voice, he asked me to take care of myself and seek help in case something went wrong. My eyes burned, but I couldn't cry. It was as if the shock had anesthetized everything inside me. The pain came in silent waves like tides that I had no way to stop. I wondered how long Richard had been carrying it alone, and why. After all, when did our daughter stop being our daughter? The audio ended with a dry crack, as if someone had suddenly entered the room. Richard took a deep breath, stopped recording, and nothing more. I stared at the black screen of my phone, unable to move my fingers. It felt like I had just witnessed a ghost trying to protect me. And ironically, I've never felt so unprotected. I put the device away again and tried to breathe slowly, but my mind raced to all the moments when Melissa took care of my bills. I remembered checks she had written, documents she had given me ready to sign, of how he always said that I didn't need to understand these complex details. Now, each of these memories felt like a warning that I ignored. The rest of the morning passed like a blur. I tried to tidy up the house, but I knocked over 2 cups and hit my head on the closet door. I was too stunned to do anything that required lucidity, so finally I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. I wrote only one sentence: I need to find out the whole truth, whatever the cost. In the afternoon, I received a message from Melissa saying that she wanted to talk seriously with me later. The tone was cold, authoritarian, as if she were my guardian and not my daughter. I felt a shiver down my spine, followed by a wave of courage that was born from who knows where. I knew that, before talking to her, I needed to have evidence beyond the audio, and that meant opening the safe that Richard mentioned. The problem is that I didn't even remember where the key to that safe was. He always said he was in a safe place, but he never explained where. I got up, took a deep breath, and headed downstairs toward the dark basement. The lamp flickered, illuminating the cold brick walls. It was there, in that humid silence, that I decided to face my own story. I descended the last few steps carefully, holding the railing as if it were my only support. The smell of damp wood and ancient dust filled my nostrils. The basement was the place in the house that I knew the least, as if it were Richard's exclusive territory. Downstairs, the objects seemed frozen in time, covered by white sheets that looked more like ghosts. And in the darkest corner, hidden behind a bookshelf, was the safe. I approached slowly, feeling my heart beat too hard. The metal door seemed heavier than I remembered, as if it had kept centuries of silence. I tried to pull, but it was locked, of course. So I started looking for the key in old boxes, drawers, tool cans. Each object I touched brought a memory that weighed like lead. That's when I found a crumpled blue can with the label almost erased. Inside it were screws, rolled up papers, and a small golden key. I held her between my fingers, not breathing, almost in disbelief. It was as if Richard had guided my steps, even from the other lardo. Calm my trembling hand, I put the key in the lock of the safe. The click I heard echoed through the basement like a gunshot. I opened the door slowly, afraid of what I might find inside. There was a wooden box, a brown envelope, a notebook, and several loose documents. I took the envelope first. It was lighter than I expected. When I opened it, I felt the air escape from my lungs. Inside were bank statements with amounts I had never seen in my life. There were my signatures, but I knew deep down that they were not mine. The papers showed transfers to an unknown account, and all on dates that Melissa took care of my finances. The feeling of betrayal went through me like a blade. I trembled, but I kept flipping through each page. I also found documents with Melissa's name listed as financial responsible. Some said that I had authorized this, others that I was temporarily disabled. I had never read any of that, and Richard never told me. It was as if my whole life had been managed in the shadows, like I was a pet plant, not an adult person. I sat on the cold floor, holding the papers to my chest. The silence of the basement seemed to watch me with pity. I thought of Richard, the guilt in his voice, the fear, the request for me not to trust our daughter. I thought about how Melissa always said she did everything for my sake, and now I saw that her good had always come before mine. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs, footsteps that were all too familiar. My heart stopped for a second, and I felt my whole body freeze. Melissa was at home, and I was in the basement with the proof of everything in my hands. I put the documents under my blouse, took a deep breath, and turned off the light. I climbed slowly, trying not to make noise. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Melissa was standing in the kitchen, staring at me as if she had already expected my presence. There was arrogance on her face, but also something new, despair. She asked what I was doing in the basement, her voice too tense to be casual. I just replied, "Nothing you need to know." She narrowed her eyes, approaching me with slow steps. She said that I looked strange, that she was worried about me, that I needed to rest. It was the same tone of manipulation she'd always used, but now I could see right through it. I felt a thread of courage run through my body, hot and unexpected, and for the first time in my life, I lied to my daughter without trembling. He said he was just looking for old photos and that he hadn't found anything. She didn't believe it, I could tell by her eyes, the eyes of someone who has always liked control. But he did not insist. Instead, he gave a bitter smile and told me that the next day he wanted to talk about important decisions. My stomach churned. I knew what that meant. When she left the kitchen, I finally let go of the air I was exerting. I went back to my room and locked the door, something I had never done in my entire life. I sat on the bed with the documents scattered in front of me. Each paper was a proof, a stab, and a warning. And there, alone, I understood that my own daughter was the danger Richard tried to protect me from. The next day, I woke up with that familiar weight on my back, but there was something different about Mim. I no longer felt like just a confused victim, but someone holding a bomb about to explode. Melissa arrived early, talked about accounts, papers, decisions, as if I were an employee of hers. I just nodded, pretending to agree, as the hidden documents burned in the drawer. When she left, saying that she would solve everything, I decided that I would not let anyone else solve anything for me. I took the bag, put the statements, the letter, and Richard's cell phone inside it. I looked at my reflection in the mirror in the hallway and almost didn't recognize myself. My eyes were harder, less scared, as if carrying a silent decision. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew where to start. I returned to the bank, the place where so many lies had been masked as normal procedures. The branch was busy, full of people in a hurry, with eyes glued to screens and numbers. I sat on a chair near the entrance, hugging the bag as if it were a life jacket. After a few minutes, I saw a familiar face, the man I had seen days earlier on the bench. He was arguing with an official, but not raising his voice, just pointing out laws and regulations. There was firmness in his posture, a security that drew attention. When the employee walked away, he saw me and recognized my curious look. He approached with kindness, asking if he could help with anything. I hesitated, because I didn't usually trust strangers, but my situation had already exceeded the usual limit. I only said that I needed to understand some movements in my accounts. He introduced himself as Mark Ellis, a newly arrived lawyer in the city, specializing in family and estate law. I said, still in a confused way, that my husband had left an audio talking about bills and documents. I mentioned, without too much detail, that someone in my family could have messed where they shouldn't. Mark listened attentively, without interrupting me, and that in itself gave me a little relief. When I finished, he asked to see some papers, if I felt comfortable. My hands trembled, but I handed over the statements and documents falsely signed by me. He analyzed everything with the eyes of someone who sees more than what is written. He pointed out dates, added values, linked information that I would never have called. He said there were clear signs of fraud, abuse of trust, and possible signature forgery. He asked if I had signed those papers in any office or hospital. I replied that I had not, that I had never been anywhere to declare incapacity. When I mentioned Richard's audio, his eyes became even more serious. I explained that the recording made it clear that he had tried to protect me, but he didn't know how to act. Mark asked to listen to the audio, with my consent, of course. I placed my cell phone on the bank table, as if I was putting my heart open. As Richard's voice began to play, I saw Mark's countenance change. He remained silent until the end of the recording, without looking away from the screen. When it was over, he took a deep breath and said that it was more than a family drama. It was a serious case, with serious legal implications, especially if someone was trying to declare me incapable. He asked if I had heard anything along those lines recently. I immediately remembered Melissa's words about intervening legally and confirmed it with a nod. Mark rested his elbows on the table and spoke calmly but firmly. He said that if I wanted to, he could help me protect myself before it was too late. He explained that there were legal measures to prevent abuse, even from children. He talked about interdiction, about how it was possible to reverse and avoid this type of coup. I listened to everything with a mixture of fear and hope, as if learning to breathe again. At the end of the conversation, he handed me a card with the office number. He said that I didn't have to decide anything at that moment, but that it didn't take too long. I took the card carefully, as if it were a key that could open a new door in my life. I left the bench with wobbly legs, but a little less desperate heart. For the first time, I felt that I might not be completely alone in this war. I returned home with Mark's card burning in my pocket, as if it were a forbidden secret. I knew that if Melissa found him, she would make a fuss and try to convince me that he wanted to take advantage of me. As I climbed the steps of the porch, I decided that I would not tell her anything, at least not for now. It was the first time I kept something important from my daughter, and it hurt more than I expected. It didn't take long for Melissa to appear, as if she had been warned by some sixth sense. He entered without knocking, as he always did, spreading his presence around the house like a perfume too strong. He brought a folder of documents, a serious countenance, and a tone of voice that did not admit discussion. He said he needed to talk to me urgently about my situation. I already knew that nothing good would come after that sentence. She sat at the table, opened the folder, and spread papers in front of me as if she were presenting a report. She started by saying that I was very downcast, forgetful, vulnerable, and that this worried her. He said that the world was dangerous, that there were malicious people, that I was an easy target. Each sentence was masked with care, but her gaze was that of someone evaluating a problem, until he finally said the words I feared to hear. I thought about starting a partial interdiction process. I felt the blood disappear from my face, but I tried hard not to show it. I asked what that meant exactly, trying to keep my voice steady. She explained, with the coldness of someone who reads a manual, that it would only be to protect me, that she would be responsible for all my financial and legal decisions. That way I would be safe and not run the risk of being deceived by anyone. What she didn't know is that I had already been deceived by her. As she spoke, the images of Richard's statements, false signatures and letter flashed before my eyes. I felt like throwing everything on the table, screaming, exposing every lie, but there was something inside of me telling me to wait, to be strategic. So I just took a deep breath and asked why it was so urgent now. Melissa looked away for a second before answering. He said he had heard that I was confused in the bank, asking nonsense, that someone could be filling my head with unnecessary suspicion. He asked if I had spoken to any employees, lawyers, or strangers about my accounts. I denied, feeling that, in that game, lying was my only momentary defense weapon. She continued, saying that she had already talked to a well-known doctor. He said that he could attest that I needed follow-up for important decisions. She presented everything as if it were an act of love, a sacrifice she was willing to make for me. Every word of her made me more sure that I needed to run before she locked me in a cool cage. When she finally showed me a form for initial analysis, I felt a tightness in my throat. She asked me to sign, saying it was just a preliminary step. I looked at the paper, at the pen, at her face, and at that moment, the Helena who always gave in and trusted gave way to another version of Mimu. I returned the pen and said calmly that I would not sign anything without talking to a lawyer first. Melissa's face changed immediately, as if I had pulled an invisible rug from under her feet. She asked in a sharper tone, since when I needed a lawyer to talk to my own daughter. He insinuated that someone was already manipulating me, that I had no ability to understand these things on my own. I kept calm, even though I felt my heart race inside my chest. She only said that she was tired of signing things without knowing it, and that it would not happen anymore. She was silent for a few seconds, staring at me with a mixture of anger and surprise. Then he got up, picked up the papers with hands too fast, and threw everything back into the briefcase. She said I was being ungrateful, that she just wanted to protect me, that I had no idea what I was doing. He played the last sentence as a veiled threat. Then don't say I didn't try to help you. He slammed the door on his way out, leaving a trail of perfume and resentment through the house. I walked to the bedroom, closed the door carefully this time, and sat on the bed. I took Mark's card, which I had hidden inside the cover of an old book. I called the number with trembling hands, but with a firm decision. When I heard his voice on the other end of the line, I said the phrase that changed everything. I need your help, and I need it now. Mark asked me to take everything to his office, but before that, I needed to check something myself. After the threat of interdiction, I knew that Melissa would attack quickly, perhaps that very day. So I went down to the basement again, now with the flashlight of my cell phone in my hand and my heart steady. The safe was still there, open, as if it had been waiting for me all my life. But now I wanted to see everything, not just the one I had hurriedly picked up the day before. I knelt before him and pulled out the wooden box, heavy and covered in fine dust. The hinges creaked as I opened it, revealing more papers I hadn't looked at before. There were invoices, receipts, folders hand-labeled by Richard, all meticulously organized. It was strange. My husband had always been careful, but never like this. This was almost paranoia. I took a black envelope, the only one different from the others, and immediately felt that there was something important there. The letter inside seemed more recent, written a few days before his death. Richard said that he had discovered new movements made by Melissa, bigger than he imagined. It said that she had used my digital signature on contracts and that someone was helping her, someone influential. He asked for forgiveness for not telling me sooner, saying he was afraid of seeing me suffer. "If you're reading this, Helena, it's because the worst happened," he wrote at the end. My whole body trembled as I read that sentence. It was as if Richard was by my side, holding my hand, trying to guide me even after death. And for the first time, I felt angry at him, angry that he had left me in the dark for so long. But I also felt love, gratitude and pain, all at the same time, like a knot that was difficult to undo. The mixture of feelings burned inside me, but I didn't have time to sink into that whirlwind. I continued rummaging through the box, also finding a USB stick with a label, "To Helena, urgent." My heart almost stopped when I held him. If Richard left a USB stick, it is because there were more than words, more than extracts. Maybe photos, documents, recordings, evidence. I knew I needed to give it to Mark before Melissa realized what I had found. I put everything inside the bag, reinforcing the zipper as if protecting it would protect myself. When I got up, something in the corner of the basement caught my eye. Fresh footprints on the dusty floor. They weren't mine. I knew the size of my steps. They were lighter, smaller, female. Melissa had already been there. The chill that ran down my spine didn't come from the basement. It came from certainty. She was desperate. Maybe she already knew that Richard had left something hidden. Maybe you searched, tried to find before me. Maybe you even deleted the audio precisely because you knew you wouldn't control the rest. Now I had more than a family problem. I had an enemy inside my own home. I left the basement with the feeling of being watched. I locked the door, even though I knew Melissa had a copy of the key to the entire house. I went upstairs, closed windows, tested locks. I've never been like that before, paranoid, suspicious. But now every noise seemed like a warning. I grabbed my bag, put on my coat and headed straight to Mark's office. On the way, my cell phone rang. I stared at the display for a few seconds, hearing the ringtone echo inside my head. I could answer, confront, scream, cry, but I pressed refuse with a firm hand and kept walking, because for the first time I was choosing myself. Mark's office was on the second floor of a simple building with large windows and a discreet sign. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the bag weigh down as if carrying stones. When I arrived, the receptionist greeted me with a shy smile, and I just waved. Mark came to the door of his office and invited me in, with that air of a confident professional. It was only when I closed the door that I felt my legs soften. He helped me sit down and asked if I was okay. I said no, but that I wanted to stay. So I opened the bag and put everything on the table. Statements, documents, photos, letters, USB stick. Mark looked at it like someone who finds a puzzle of 1,000 pieces, and I felt, for the first time, accompanied in that pain. I handed him the black card and asked him to read it. I saw his expression change as he went through Richard's words. He took 2 deep breaths, especially in the part where Richard mentioned someone influential helping Melissa. When he finished, he ran his hand over his chin in concern. "Helena, this is much more serious than I thought," he said. I opened the USB stick with trembling hands. Mark connected to the computer and the files appeared. Spreadsheets, photos of documents, screenshots of messages, proof of clandestine movements. There were even recordings of conversations between Melissa and a bank manager. Richard had gathered it all up and hidden it from me so I wouldn't worry. When I listened to one of the recordings, my heart sank. It was Melissa's voice, cold, calculating, talking about my future, as if I were a burden. She said that the old woman didn't need to know anything, that she would control everything anyway. It talked about convincing myself that I was forgetting things, about using my natural frailty. I heard it with my hand over my mouth, trying not to sob. Mark paused the recording and stared at me with a firm but empathetic look. He said that I had solid proof of fraud, emotional abuse, manipulation, and attempted undue interdiction. That with all that, Melissa not only couldn't control me, but could face serious consequences. But I also said that it would be a war, and that I needed to be emotionally ready. I replied that I'd been living the war for years, I just didn't know it. The pain I felt was not just for me, but for Richard. And I, without knowing it, lived next to a daughter who planned to turn me into a prisoner inside my own house. It was a new morning, different, sharper than a knife. A morning for the mother I would never be again. Mark asked me if I wanted to move forward, present everything in court, expose the truth. I took a deep breath, holding up Richard's letter one last time. I closed my eyes and remembered all the times Melissa diminished me, told me to shut up, decided for me. When I opened my eyes, something inside me was hard, burning, decided. "Yes," I replied, "for me and for him." Mark wrote everything down, separated the evidence, and prepared the first legal protection documents. He said that as long as I was under his guidance, Melissa would not be able to interdict me. He explained the next steps to me calmly, as if guiding someone across a narrow bridge. I listened to it all intently, taking in every detail as if my life depended on it, because it did. And for the first time I felt like I was no longer in the dark. When I left the office, the sun was already low, gilding the street with a soft light. I walked slowly, feeling the cold wind hit my face. The pain was still there, but mixed with something new, strength. I was tired, shaking, devastated, but lifted up inside. And she knew that, from then on, Melissa would no longer face her submissive mother. She would face the woman of steel who had just been born. If this story is hooking you, take the opportunity now to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Here I tell strong and real stories about family, secrets, and overcoming, and you won't want to miss the next chapters. Returning home from a visit to Mark's office was like walking into a minefield. Each room seemed to contain a distorted memory, an echo of everything I hadn't noticed before. I sat in the living room for a few minutes, staring at the door as if I expected Melissa to come in at any moment. But instead, messages came. Long, aggressive, full of veiled criticism. She said that I was weird, that I was worried, that I needed to solve my life for me. I deleted them all without responding. something I would never have done months ago. With each notification, my heart raced. But now I had proof, I had support, I had a plan. I opened the documents scattered on the table again and reviewed each one as if I were studying for a decisive test. Richard seemed to come to life in every line of paper, as if still trying to protect me. As contradictory as it was, I felt like we were fighting this battle together. Late in the afternoon, the doorbell rang so loud that I almost knocked over the coffee cup. When I looked through the peephole, I saw two familiar faces, my sister, Claire, and my brother-in-law. They never showed up unannounced, which could only mean one thing: Melissa had spoken to them. I opened the door slowly, not knowing whether I would receive acceptance or judgment. Claire's expression, however, has already given me the answer. She entered without waiting for an invitation and started talking fast, as she always does when she is nervous. He said that Melissa was worried about me, that she thought I was delusional, that I needed help. My brother-in-law nodded his head in silence, as if agreeing with everything without thinking. I tried to explain calmly that things were not as Melissa said, but before I could continue, Claire blurted out, "She thinks you're being manipulated, Helena." That hit me like a slap. For years, Melissa took advantage of my kindness to shape the narrative she wanted. And now, seeing my own family buying that version, hurt like someone was ripping something out of me. I stood up, took one of the documents and handed it to Claire, saying, "Read it." She widened her eyes at the sight of my forged signature. He looked at me in deep silence, the kind of silence that reveals more than 1,000 words. My brother-in-law approached, took another paper and turned pale when he saw the date and the amount of the transfer. They didn't know where to stick their faces, and for the first time, I felt the truth begin to spread, slowly but relentlessly. Claire tried to apologize, but I raised my hand, asking her to stop. He said that I would not hold a grudge, but that now my focus was to protect myself. I explained that I had looked for a lawyer and that measures were being taken. She was surprised by my firmness, perhaps more so than by the documents. Melissa never mentioned to them that I still had some strength. After they left, the phone rang again. It was Melissa, of course, realizing that her version of events was falling apart. I let it play until it stopped, and when the silence returned, I felt victorious for not answering. At the same time, I received a message from Mark, confirming that he had filed the first legal protection documents. War was officially declared. At night, I sat up in bed with the lights off, taking a deep breath. I was tired, but a different tiredness. The tiredness of someone who struggles. I thought of everything I lost, everything I had endured, everything that was taken away from me, and yet I was standing. Maybe this was the first time in years that I really felt alive. And ironically, it took my own daughter to face it to happen. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, as if my body knew something important was about to happen. I made coffee and sat down at the table with quiet determination. Mark sent me a message saying that the preliminary hearing had been scheduled for a few days from now. That word, audience, echoed inside me like a bang. It was real, official, inevitable. I would face my daughter in front of a judge. I asked Mark to come to my house to talk in person. He arrived with a briefcase full of papers and a watchful eye, always polite. We sat in the living room, and he began to explain to me how everything would work. He spoke of the judge, the possible questions, the evidence that would be presented. I tried to absorb every detail, as if my life depended on it, because it did. Mark said that Melissa would try to argue that I was emotionally unstable, that she would use my grief, my age, my natural fragility, to turn me into someone incapable. I listened quietly, feeling my stomach turn, but he also said that I had something she didn't: truth, proof, and coherence, and that this, in a court of law, was worth more than any manipulation. We rehearsed possible questions from the judge and my answers. With each question, I felt my voice tremble less and my posture become more firm. It was strange to hear my own voice full of firmness, as if another Helena spoke for me. Mark smiled at times, as if he saw potential where I only saw fear. And with each compliment he gave, I felt my spine straighten a little more. When we finished, he showed me the dossier containing all the organized tests. It was thick, heavy, almost bigger than I imagined it could bear. But when I saw my name at the top, I felt that I was recovering something, my history, my autonomy. Mark put his hand on the document and said, "You're not alone in this, Helena." This phrase caught me off guard, drawing tears that I didn't even realize I was holding. After he left, I spent the afternoon reviewing everything again. Melissa, as if she had radar, sent new messages insinuating that I needed professional help. The difference is that now, instead of feeling guilt or doubt, I felt strength. I read the messages and saw not the worried daughter but the woman who tried to erase me, and that clarity hurt, but it also liberated. In the evening, I received a call from Claire. She apologized again and said that if I wanted to, she would go with me to the hearing. I was surprised, but I kindly declined. I needed to face it alone, not because I was alone, but because it was my struggle. It was my chance to finally raise my head after so many years of looking down. I went to sleep later than I should have, but with a strange peace, a hard, bitter, but true peace. I knew that the following days would be difficult, perhaps the hardest of my life. But she also knew that she was no longer the same woman Melissa had controlled for so many years. I was someone who had finally opened my eyes. I turned off the light and stared at the ceiling for a few minutes. The house was silent, but it no longer looked gloomy. It was as if I had reconquered every wall, every piece of furniture, every corner. And before falling asleep, I repeated to myself a simple but powerful phrase: I will fight, and this time I'm going to win. In the days leading up to the hearing, the city seemed smaller than ever. No matter where I went, I always felt looks following me, some curious, others full of pity. Melissa had talked too much, spreading her version of the facts as if it were absolute truth. I, on the other hand, walked in silence, carrying truth so heavy that they seemed to change my posture. Mark said I needed to rest, but my mind wouldn't shut down for a second. One day, while returning from the pharmacy, I was approached by an old neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore. He asked if I had a minute and, before I even answered, said he needed to talk about Melissa. But I took a deep breath and asked her to continue. She said that months before Richard's death, Melissa came to her to ask her to testify about my mental decline. He said Melissa wanted to create a compelling picture in case something happened to him. Those words hit me like stones, tearing the air out of my lungs. But Mrs. Whitmore did not stop. She said she refused because she knew me too well to believe in such cruelty. That's when I realized that Melissa's network of manipulations was bigger than I imagined. The next day, I went to the old office where Richard worked. I wanted to get some papers to give to Mark, but I ended up finding something unexpected. The accountant who worked with my husband approached me with a grim look. He said there was information he needed to share before the hearing, something that could help put an end to all this. We entered his office, and he closed the door carefully. He said that months before Richard's death, Melissa tried to force him to alter financial reports. He refused, and after that, she never returned to the office. But she kept pressuring Richard. Melissa had been working behind the scenes for much longer. He then pulled a locked folder from the bottom drawer. He said he kept it in case Richard never got a chance to act. Inside were printed emails, messages, and the original reports with changed dates. Clear evidence that Melissa tried to interfere with official documents. This was pure dynamite, and Mark needed to see it immediately. I returned home with the briefcase hugged to my chest as if carrying a fragile baby. I knew that every step needed to be calculated, as Melissa was getting more aggressive every day. And I was right. When I arrived, I found her car in my garage. She was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes inflamed with anger and a venomous smile. He said he already knew about the hearing and that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. She got too close, invading my space, trying to intimidate me as she always did. But that version of me no longer existed. I held the briefcase firmly against the body and asked her to leave my house. Melissa laughed, as if she thought it was a ridiculous joke, but when I didn't back down, her expression finally changed. She called me ungrateful, crazy, manipulated. He said I was destroying our family, as if she hadn't started it all. I listened quietly, with the calm of someone who finally sees the enemy without the veil of love. When I asked her to leave again, this time firmly, she grabbed her bag and kicked out the door. War now had a face, a voice and a smell, and it was no longer silent. I closed all the doors of the house and sat in Richard's favorite armchair. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor that took over my body. I knew Melissa wouldn't give up so easily, but I also knew that for the first time in my life, I had weapons, proof, and courage. And when I looked at the briefcase on my lap, I understood that the end, for better or worse, was approaching. The morning of the hearing came faster than I wanted. I woke up with my heart racing, as if my body already knew that something decisive was about to happen. I put on a simple but elegant outfit and tied my hair with the same care I had on my wedding day. It was as if I was preparing to face not a courtroom, but life itself. Before leaving, I touched Richard's photo, as if looking for strength in a ghost. Mark was waiting for me at the door of the courthouse, impeccable in his dark suit. When he saw me, he offered his arm like gentlemen do in old movies. I accepted, and that simple gesture brought me unexpected courage. We entered together, crossing the corridor full of echoes, footsteps, and curious looks. Melissa was already there, accompanied by a lawyer who looked like she came out of a TV advertisement. She was impeccable, with the perfect smile rehearsed as if she were the victim of the story. When our eyes met, she arched her eyebrows, triumphant. But his smile faltered when he saw Mark next to me. I think for the first time, she realized that I wasn't as helpless as she imagined. The hearing began a few minutes later, in a cold room, with too bright a light. The judge entered, asked everyone to sit down, and began by explaining the reason for the hearing. Melissa was the first to speak, as always. She cried, lamented, put her hand on her chest and said she was worried about me. He said I was confused, fragile, influenced by strangers. Every word was a calculated blow, full of theatricality. Her lawyer presented the false report, claiming that I had memory lapses. For a moment, I felt my body tremble, but Mark put his hand on the table, firm. When it was our turn, he asked the judge for permission to present the evidence. It started with Richard's audio, which echoed through the room, filling the air with silence. Melissa turned pale, as if the floor had disappeared under her feet. Next, Mark presented the statements, forged signatures, accountants' reports, and the USB stick. With each document, her lawyer became more disconcerted, leafing through papers without knowing what to dispute. Melissa tried to interrupt, deny, accuse, but she got tangled up in her own lies. When Mark put the recording where she said, "The old woman doesn't need to know anything," I heard a collective sigh in the room. It was then that I realized her mask had finally fallen. The judge asked for silence, analyzed the documents for a few minutes that seemed like hours. Then he looked directly at Melissa with an expression so serious that even I shuddered. He said that there was solid evidence of manipulation, fraud, and attempted undue interdiction. He declared that the report presented by her would be investigated for possible falsification, and finally, it granted my legal protection, preventing any attempt to control my assets or decisions. Melissa collapsed in her chair, her face red, writhing in anger. I watched her in silence, feeling something that was not victory nor joy. It was liberation. Mark put his hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "You did it, Helena." And I felt that for the first time in years, I had regained not only my rights, but my dignity. When I left the room, the air outside seemed lighter, as if the world had given me back what was mine. Outside the courthouse, the city looked the same, but I wasn't. I wouldn't go home like the woman who walked in. I left that court stronger than I entered, more aware, more awake. Melissa called me by name, but I kept walking, not looking back. because from that day on, I had finally learned to walk on my own. Just when I thought everything had already been shown, Mark said there was still one important detail. He asked the judge to listen to one last recording, found on the USB stick of Richard.eu. He had not yet had the courage to listen to that part. The room fell silent as the audio began to play again. It was Richard's voice talking to someone, and that someone was Melissa. In the recording, he asked her to stop transfers, saying that it could harm me. She replied impatiently, saying that I didn't need all that money. She said that if I became more dependent, it would be easier to take care of me. Richard insisted that it was wrong, that he didn't want her to go down that path. And then she said the phrase that made my heart freeze. "You're already old, Dad. Let me solve it." There was a silence on the recording, followed by a heavy sigh from Richard. She asked her to think of me, of her mother who was always by her side. But Melissa cut the conversation short, changing the subject, as if she owned the world. When the audio ended, the room seemed smaller, cramped, almost airless. The judge looked at her seriously and asked if she recognized her own voice. For a few seconds, Melissa tried to deny it, saying that it could be a montage, but the judge's gaze and the accumulated evidence left no room for maneuver. She broke down, first denying, then contradicting herself, until finally she fell silent. And in that silence, her guilt screamed louder than any words. My body trembled, but I held my head high. I wanted to cry, scream, ask when my daughter had been lost like this. But I understood that this type of answer is not given in courts, but in memories. The judge determined that the public prosecutor's office be called to formally investigate Melissa. I heard it with a heavy heart, but also with a strange sense of justice. When the session was over for good, we left the room under curious eyes. Some looked at me with pity, others with respect, and some with astonishment. I, that silent and fragile widow, was now the woman who faced her own daughter in court. Mark walked beside me, holding the briefcase with the documents. I walked alongside my own courage, holding on to something I never had before, a voice. Outside, Melissa approached me like a storm. His eyes were red. I don't know if from anger, shame, or fear. She began to say that I had destroyed her life, that I had chosen strangers over her own daughter. I listened to everything, without looking away, without shrinking, without lowering my head. And when she took a breath to continue, I raised my hand and asked her to stop. She said that she was the one who destroyed everything. Long before I said, "Enough is enough," that I spent years trusting, accepting, keeping silent, believing every excuse, and that even so, she chose to turn me into an obstacle, not a mother. Melissa kept looking at me, as if she saw someone else. Perhaps, for the first time, she was seeing the Helena who had always existed in silence. She wanted to get closer, maybe to hug me, maybe to push me again. But I retreated a step, not out of fear, out of protection. He said that he did not wish her harm, but that he could no longer be an accomplice in his own destruction, that what came from there would be a consequence of her choices, not mine. She stood still, as if looking for something in my face that was no longer there. Submission. Mark led me to the car, and I slowly got in, like someone entering a new version of life. As he drove, I stared out the window, watching the trees go by. The world was still the same outside, but inside me, everything had changed. I had faced the day I feared the most, and I survived. And more than that, I left it in one piece, even if marked. The days following the hearing were eerily quiet. There were no phone calls from Melissa, no unexpected visits, no long messages. It was as if the storm had passed and left a dense void in the air. I walked around the house as if recognizing a place for the first time. Every corner felt more mine than ever. I received news that the investigations into Melissa were moving forward. Mark explained everything to me calmly, so that I wouldn't get lost in legal terms. There was a possibility that she would be held criminally responsible for the frauds. This idea hurt and relieved me at the same time, like bitter medicine. I didn't want to see my daughter suffer, but I also couldn't ignore what she did. Some family members tried to get closer, some out of guilt, others out of curiosity. I listened, talked, but without opening the door too wide. Now I had learned to set boundaries, something I had never done before, not for lack of will, but for fear of being seen as selfish. Today I understood that protecting oneself was not selfishness, it was survival. I started to reorganize the house, not as someone who arranges objects, but as someone who redesigns a life. I donated furniture that reminded me of arguments. I changed curtains that always seemed too closed. I opened windows that were almost never opened, letting the cold air in unceremoniously. Each physical change seemed to stir something inside me. It was as if I was taking myself apart and putting myself together in a new way. Claire came to visit me a few times, always with more affection and less judgment. One day, sitting at the table with hot tea, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said she felt guilty for not having noticed anything before. I held her hand and replied that I hadn't noticed either, and it was the mother. Sometimes love is just what makes us blind. As the weeks went by, I started thinking about the future for the first time in a long time. Mark helped me reorganize my finances, making sure everything was truly in my name. He said that I could invest in something that would do me good, a small business, a course, a trip. The idea of starting something at 70 seemed absurd at first glance, but the more I thought, the less impossible it seemed. One afternoon, strolling through the city center, I passed in front of a small, empty store. The for rent sign was faded, as if it had been waiting for someone for a long time. I stood there for a few minutes, watching the dusty window. I imagined a cozy cafe, with books, plants, and simple cakes, as I like to do. For the first time, a bold thought occurred to me. Why not? I told Mark the idea, hoping he'd laugh or call me a late dreamer, but he smiled genuinely and said he would help with the contracts if I wanted to move forward. That support gave me a boost I didn't know I needed. I started researching, planning, doing math in an old notebook. And little by little, the coffee took shape, first in my head, then on paper. I still thought about Melissa every day, of course. Longing and sorrow coexisted inside me, fighting in silence. But now, when I remembered her, I didn't shrink anymore. I accepted pain as part of my story, not as the end of it, and that in itself was already a huge victory. One night I sat in Richard's armchair with a cup of tea in my hands. I looked at his picture on the shelf and smiled for the first time without feeling guilty. I knew he had been wrong to hide so much from me, but I also knew that he tried to protect me in his own way. Now, however, I no longer needed to be protected. I knew how to defend myself, and inside me something whispered, "You're not fragile, Helena. You're made of steel." Time passed slowly in the following weeks, but it passed, and that, in itself, was a victory. The house seemed less loaded, less grey, as if it had finally breathed after years of suffocation. The papers were organized, the process was taking its course, and I was already able to wake up without feeling afraid. The idea of the cafe, which started shy, took concrete shape. I found the ideal spot and signed the contract. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt that something new really belonged to me. I spent days cleaning the space, dusting shelves and opening jammed windows. Every gesture felt symbolic, as if I was dusting myself off. I painted walls, chose plants, selected some books that I loved to leave in the reading corner. I bought simple towels, beautiful cups and lamps that made the environment welcoming. The cafe started to smell like home even before it opened its doors. Mark showed up a few times to help me, even when I said I didn't need it. He helped set up shelves, review contracts, and sometimes just kept me company. There was never anything but respect and kindness between us, but it became an essential part of my new life, a presence that didn't suffocate me, didn't diminish me, didn't control me. It was just someone who was there, and I didn't know what it was like to have that. Melissa, on the other hand, kept her distance. She didn't look for me, she didn't call, she didn't knock on the door, and it hurt me more than I admitted. But I also knew that his silence was not peace, it was a consequence. The investigations continued, and the truths were being dealt with where they should be treated. I had to accept that some relationships only survive when there is truth, and ours no longer existed. Even so, there were days when I missed her, even after everything. Being a mother is a kind of love that doesn't turn off, even when it hurts. Sometimes I would imagine Melissa as a child, with her open smile and messy hair. I wondered where that girl had lost herself, in what curve of life she decided that control was worth more than love. But I also knew that I could no longer live trying to rescue someone who did not want to be rescued. On the eve of the cafe's opening, I sat at the counter with a hot cup of tea. The lights were on, soft, reflecting off the windows like a silent embrace. I looked around and felt immense pride. I had done it alone. Every detail there had the touch of my hands, my pain, my courage. It was physical proof that my life wasn't over the day Richard died. When I opened the doors the next day, the first customer was Mrs. Whitmore. She walked in smiling, saying she wanted to support the bravest neighbor on the street for the new beginning. It made me laugh. A sincere, light laugh, which I no longer remembered what it was like. Other neighbors appeared, some curious, others kind, many thrilled with my new beginning. That small cafe, so simple, seemed to pulsate life in every corner. In the late afternoon, when the movement subsided, I sat at the table by the window with a notebook. I wrote there with the pen that Richard always used, "Today I was reborn." And as I was writing, I realized that the hardest part wasn't starting over, it was accepting that I deserved to start over. I spent so many years being small to fit into other people's worlds that I forgot what it was like to occupy my own space. Now, however, there was no more empty space inside me. There was resignification. When I closed the cafe that night, the street was silent and the sky was full of stars. I walked slowly to the door of the house, feeling the cold wind hit my face gently. Before entering, I looked at the dark horizon and thanked Richard, not for protecting me, but for leaving clues for me to find myself. The pain still existed, of course, but now it walked beside me, no longer in front, guiding me. And as I turned on the light in the room, I thought, anyway, I survived, and now I choose to live. Now I want to know from you, what did you think of Helena's transformation? Do you think she did it right by facing her own daughter? What would he have done in her place? Leave your comment below. I'll read them all. Your opinion is very important and helps strengthen this community of exciting stories, full of twists and turns.